first item for policy review is policy 2.26. This is the school improvement plan and education accountability. And Amy will cover this item for you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
After further review of this policy specifically, we are going to ask to take that policy back to revise after we get some further clarifications from the state, especially regarding that reporting section. However, we do want your feedback regarding the board approving all SIP plans, not just D and F schools. So just your feedback on that. What is your opinion and how do you feel about the board only approving SIP plans for D and F schools or all schools?
When this came up, I contacted FSBA because they this kind of shocked me. This was a totally different direction than the last 20 years. And I talked to Ruth Mullen, who said she was sitting in committee meetings when this was being done, and she was surprised at the way we were interpreting it, because she said that wasn't the intent of what she felt was being the conversation during committee. And she said, she even read it, and I explained to her that, but the way it reads, and she says, no, I think it reads that you don't have to approve that plan, but she said, that means the statute's not saying that there. But she says, but I'll remind you as a board, throughout Florida statute, and I can list 3 of them that are in front of me, including probably the one that to me hits me. One, it says school improvement plan funds, the board shall not provide funds to schools for developing, shall provide funds to schools for developing and implementing of the school improvement plan. Such funds include funding for appropriate purposes of the school improvement plan pursuant to. Throughout statute, it refers to the school improvement plan and the board's responsibility to the school improvement plans. And so Ruth's comment was, why would you ever want to take that out of your control of making that final decision and review? Because you're held to all the other responsibilities. And her response was that when they debated this, or when this was added, their concern was to ensure that the D and F schools had, and it's somewhere in here, this additional reporting done.
It's the state template versus
the state's template. They wanted the state's template done with D and F schools. In doing that, they kind of seem to have unintentionally gave this implication. My feeling is this: the state's taken enough away from us. They're not taking it away, they're just saying we don't have to do it, but why would I want to take my own authority and lose our own authority? So that's just my 2 cents on it. I don't know how to.
I think we still need to revise the policy, because there's nowhere for us to send the report after you approve it. But approving it's not an issue for us.
I think that, in looking at the policy, the only issue that I really wondered is, I think it's section 1, where we had the plans and we struck out consideration for the school board and the school board's D&F. I think if you just leave that paragraph the same as we had it in policy, the rest of it, and by the way, the 1008.34, it actually is 1001.42 is in statute where it refers to the DNFs. So you might just check that reference to it. But to me, I would just keep that paragraph the same as it is in our current policy, and then modify C.
You have to modify C though, right?
You have to modify C.
Right.
But just modify C and keep, and you can continue to keep, section 2 the same, and the rest of the policy as you have it.
What if we took C and we kept it as we're going to approve each annually?
Mm-hmm.
But if we did include something for the D and F schools, and I don't know if we want to say plans according to the state template or something to that.
That's what C says. So if you just left C the way staff's recommending it, plans for schools with a grade of D and F must be approved
Yeah, what I'm saying is,
include.
we're gonna approve all of them.
So,
So-
if you had the original language, it says individual school improvement plans for consideration by the school board. And then it just says must be approved by the school board. And then it says the approved plan shall be implemented in the next year, and then you go on.
We're talking about that same policy on 2.26?
Yeah, in section two, I'm sorry, you want this right here.
Right.
This is what I'm saying, keep it as we originally had it, and not modify it to do D and Fs.
So, but doesn't the statute specifically talk about the DNF schools? You're saying the assumption is that it's all of our schools?
We're doing all the schools.
Right.
But we have to.
Right, but we
have
must
to
submit
the
to
DNF to the DOE
SIMS,
online.
to the SIMS tool.
Right, so the C stays the same as staff's recommending, because that's what's now required in statute. And no longer previously required that you submit those to the state. So all we're doing, but see, here's where it's bizarre with the state statute. While you no longer submit the plans to the state, throughout statute, it still says that we must abide by the school improvement plans in all different ways. So the question becomes then, who's ever looked at them? I mean, the board has a responsibility, I think, to at least, for the staff's sake, say, listen, you guys approved it. I mean, I think there is a burden on us to do that. And by the way, I am not talking about processes of doing, I'm just talking about the formality of in here, making it an agenda item that
Policy.
just not policy. So I'm not trying to create a new layer of bureaucracy. I'm just saying that.
Well, what I would like to consider is we still approve all of the plans.
Mhm.
But if we were to have a D or F grade school, that they would have to come before the board with the review of the plan?
Well, we were gonna say that if you were wanting to approve all plans, that services would recommend to the superintendent that we would have all schools present their school improvement plans to all the members of the board, so that all the members of the board would be familiar with the plans before approving them.
But why would we do that differently than our current process for the last 20 years, which has
Well-
still involved us?
In just
Doing
that,
that.
just your school's plan, not all of them?
Well, I'm
That's
saying
referred
that
to?
our process has always been, this hasn't changed. So nothing, what we're suggesting isn't changing what we've done. You're suggesting now having a full coming forward. We've never needed that because we had agents of each of us
I think we
that did that.
We did do that at one time. It depends on the board. I mean,
I'm thinking the last since I've been though also involved in SAC, which is going back at least almost 14 years, we've never done that in those 14 years. One of the board members met with the delegation at the school, the SAC approved the plan, and then it was forwarded to an agenda item with all the plans. And so that accomplished the board seeing the plans, and if there were issues along the way,
we accomplished one board member seeing the plan.
but that's always been the way we've done that. That's been the same way. So if we're suggesting
I mean,
making
it's
a change,
if the rest of the board are okay voting on a plan that only one member,
but we've done it for 20 years.
I understand, but I mean, that doesn't.
And we've shortened the process. It used to be 80 pages, that plan.
If
And
it's a DNF school, it still might be.
And
But
it could be,
template
and it
enough.
should probably be if it's a DNF school. But in our A schools, I mean, I remember when we
Yeah,
would,
it's like a
we would have
yeah,
80
4
pages
It's like 4 pages.
and we'd go through that. I was always under the impression that our process has been effective in achieving our district's results. So I'm not sure why we would need to change that.
But we did agree to change the fact that we would not be they would not be setting up individual meetings with the board members, that they were gonna be presenting that to the SAC committees.
I don't know that, I thought that was still something that we were workshopping, that process. I didn't know that we'd made a decision on that.
Right, well, it's part of today, to
Well, that's-
discuss,
but-
we're gonna
but there's
discuss
two
policy
separate-
versus
so
process.
There's process and
then
there's policy.
Correct. So policy-wise, like I said, we are going to take that back, use your feedback, with revising it and of course bringing it back to you. But the part that you all approving all SIP plans, not just D and F schools, that's the feedback we needed so that we can now go back and revise that.
See, in looking in statute, and again, I'm going by what I think the intent was for the SAC with the school to develop a school improvement plan that the school board understood enough that they were implementing. But the school board approving the plan, they don't have discretion to change the plan. There isn't ever been in statute an opportunity for a board member or the board to change the plan on their own. So presenting it to us, it's to me is more of an informational situation than it is one that we've had any.
But it's being presented for approval, not for information.
But you can only approve it or deny it.
Yes, but I mean, if that were the case, then we could just present it for information purposes, but we're not doing that. We're being asked to present it for approval.
It's always been for approval, though.
And the real problem is
I understand
it's
that,
only
but you
one.
said it's not really for approvals, for information, but it's either,
What I mean is that we can only approve or deny it.
yeah, so.
That's
we
only,
are-
that is our only thing.
But if it gets denied, then in essence, we're gonna go back and have to change it and bring
Right.
it back. So there is influence for changing.
And that's why the process, that goes back to the process we've done. And the reason why we did that process was so that we didn't have plans, because I don't recall in the years that I've been involved in SAC, there's ever been a school improvement plan denied by the board. So if it's not been denied, and I think our process has worked to this day.
So let me just get a clarification from some other board members on your thoughts with the school improvement plan meetings. As far as us going to those meetings, are we okay with just going to the SAC meetings to hear the school improvement plan? And not have to have special meetings set up? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I remember going to a special meeting and this one principal was being shot out of the water by somebody from the district. None of them are there anymore, so I'm not, they've all long gone. But this person explained to this principal every little thing that needed to be fixed. And he was busy fixing it, writing it all down. And I was there and witnessed it. So, but that, I don't think any of that came to the board. His revised SIP plan is what came to the board for approval. So that works for me. Just sitting down with the SAEC and going over it and then bringing it to the board for our final approval.
Can we just share a process that Amy and I have kind of gone through? We wanted to share what we're doing with our administrators, and it's on the screen for you as well. Really kind of looking at school improvement plan, and as we go through, we've had several new administrators at all of our schools, so Amy and I in our conversation feel like we want to support them as they go through the process, because sometimes we assume people know things because they've been doing it, and what happens, it's not right to assume because everybody's different in what their background and thinking is. So when we looked at this, we're going to provide guidance and direction to the administrators on the development of their school improvement plan, as well as the general operation of their SAC council. And those of you might remember in the day when we did some SAC council trainings, and we did them in the evening, and we brought people together. Amy and I really feel like we want to work with our administrators to kind of help guide what that looks like. They'll then go back as the principal of the school, and they'll lead their SAC councils in what those processes should look like. If you look, the way it's a process, so this is not a linear, it's a circular process. So if you think about Deming's work and Plan, Do, Study, Act, that's kind of how this is framed for you to look at. So I'm going to just start at the top box as far as sharing data. And you can see there's some color coding. The orange color coding means it's school personnel as well as the SAC involvement. The blue color coding means it's really the responsibility of the school personnel. So if we look at the first part, sharing data, that's really a combination of both our school and SAC council reviewing the progress monitoring of your school improvement plan, reviewing surveys, assessments, discipline, and other supplemental programs. And there could be other data, you know, could have listed a whole lot. Generally, just kind of sharing, doing that data sharing. With that, moving on to the next piece is the feedback and discussion. That's where the involvement, when that data is shared, and again, it doesn't mean it's shared at one meeting. This should be ongoing. I was at a school last night and they shared some data regarding how they're doing in Algebra 1. And there was some conversation and dialogue about what we could do, how we could help, how we could support. So this kind of work should happen throughout each of the SAC meetings. There should be some kind of data share and then some kind of opportunity for feedback and discussion, talking about cause and effects, having some guiding questions. That's where those groups work together. Once all of that is done, and again, as you kind of go through that month by month, the synthesizing the data and feedback, creating the goals and strategies, that's really the school personnel. They know what resources they have at the school. They know who has the capacity and capability to do the types of things that need to be done. How could it be structured, organized? So that's school personnel. Implementing of the strategies, that's not the SAC Council involvement coming in and you know, doing the small group interventions. That's really the staff, the personnel at the school. And then the progress monitoring of the goals and strategies, you know, the school does that. When they have their staff meetings and their faculty sharing, they're talking about that data. When they bring it then to the SAC Council, which is that top orange box, that's when that information then is shared with the group. So we really saw this as an opportunity for, and again, the data sharing should not be a one-time a year piece. It should be something that should be ongoing as data is brought up. You know, there's going to be heavier times, you know, when FSA data comes in from the state, there's a lot of data there that needs to be reviewed and shared. But there's other times when some of the formative data or the school-based data that they're using might be shared throughout the year. So this was kind of our piece as far as how SAC is involved, as well as how our school personnel and how they work collaboratively.
And if that had been going on, this principle would not have been in effect.
And we know that there are SACs that are doing this, we know there are some that are not. And they might be sharing the data, but that feedback and discussion part, we don't know is definitely happening at all of our SACs the way it should be.
Right.
So that's why our district, we want as a district to provide that direction and guidance to our administration team so that we can ensure that this is the cycle that is happening at all of our schools.
And are you assuming the school board members at all the meetings?
At the SAC meetings,
Yes, we are usually, but that is the underlying assumption.
that piece, absolutely.
Yes.
The progress monitoring piece, that I always thought that was also part of a SAC's responsibility.
Well, it is when it comes to the school improvement plan. You can see there's two pieces. When you get into those individual goals and strategies of what the school's doing, and they're talking about the data and the success maker data, and they're saying, okay, what's going on each week, principals sharing with grade level teams, the SAC isn't coming into those grade level team meetings or their staff meetings.
Correct.
That's shared more of a global, let's look at the whole school picture. So we see that as part of it, but we also see there's some pieces that the school's doing that the SAC isn't going to necessarily be in the weeds with. They're going to get the big picture information.
And we're like, why I'm saying that progress monitoring is if I recall, we typically have a mid-year review of the SIP that's done with SAC, which is that progress monitoring of.
Which is up in the shared data piece, the SIP progress
Right,
monitoring.
right.
Is that what you mean, the orange box on the top?
No, I'm that, well, the progress monitoring though, usually, I guess that's where I'm kind of thinking, there's usually the data that comes out. That used to drive
That gets
what was
collected
going
and
to
charted,
be.
right?
And then as the year progressed, there was a progress monitoring to SAC of the SIP, of
Exactly.
the results to do that.
And that's what,
That's, which to me would be like halfway through the circle.
But we see that as being, we've kind of looked at this a little differently as far as we've refined what that should look like. We're getting data all the time now. You know, in the past, when we would only get data maybe once or twice. Teachers now, with the tools that they have, they're getting data every week on kids. Sometimes every day they're getting on kids. So we feel like that progress monitoring should be once every month. What data do we have to share? Maybe we have discipline data, maybe we have attendance data.
That's connected to the
That's
SIP.
connected to the SIP, and that is shared. So really, instead of it being, we're just gonna wait till mid-year, it should be ongoing. What are some things, you know, again, at the school I was at last night, they talked about Algebra 1, the real focus on how can we help support, because that was some data that they really were digging in deep. They said, here's what we're seeing, here's what we have right now, here's what our plan of action is. to me, that was a great way that the SAC Council was involved, the data was shared, they came up with some ideas for some new strategies that they said, have you thought about using students to help support the kid, the other students? It was a great conversation. That was really a good use of how the SAC Council is involved in the SIP plan.
And I don't disagree, but like, for example, the school I went to the SAC last night, they won't meet again until April.
Some do quarterly,
And
some
so,
do
and
monthly.
well, I think a lot of our SACs have
Quarterly.
moved to quarterly. And so I see what you're saying, but that's not
Have a little
entirely
different.
mirroring what we have out there right now. And the reason we had out there is because a lot of the SIP was driven by some of the SAC improvement funds, which have dried up over the years. What's been interesting this year is now that there's been money again, some of those conversations that we used to have, some of the things that drove being able to fund, some of these improvements, we're almost having them again because parents are saying, hey, that's interesting. Why are we doing that? Why are we spending the money for that? Is there, and how does it tie into? Which is to me interesting because again, well, we've kind of known the disconnect has been unfortunately the flow of money into the SACs.
And this is why Amy and I really are feeling like we want to take the lead on
4
this.
times a year by statute.
By statute.
We used to meet every month.
They use,
A
And there
lot
are
of
some
them did.
schools that still do. Some are quarterly, they decide how to.
Depends on the
I don't think I have one SAC that meets
It does
every
not.
month anymore.
And then it's a problem with knowledge, that when you have 4 meetings instead of 1 a month, and you really can't keep up with everything, you don't know what's happening, someone could
Some do
have
bi-monthly.
sold the schools to another county, and you won't know this information. And I like knowing the information. And one of the favorite parts that I had, I guess it's one that y'all don't have, you get my mic down, because I know you're leaning in, is meeting at the end, meeting with the principal and other people, and meeting with the person who's a SAC representative from the school board, and they go over everything that's occurred, the successes, the things that weren't. And you really feel like, hey, I have a grasp on this. I started out, in August, now I'm finishing up in May, and I can really see how everything has moved. I have a grasp on it, and I don't like to get rid of that. It's a culmination. It's cooking a dinner and then not serving it, putting it in the trash can or something. I want a culmination.
At yesterday's SAC meeting, Dr. Bruner was there, and it was at PGE. And I remember Dr. Bruner, who was one of my trainers as a SAC parent, talking about that the process was so important to the outcome. And I guess my conversation with all of the SIP, with the board's involvement with it, is that the process that we've gone through has resulted in positive outcomes. And I think it's been great that I know Mr. Hebert, Mr. Mullen, Amy, you've been involved improving the school improvement plan process, research and accountability, and before with Mr. Simon as well, streamlining it, trying to make sure that we're not just putting boilerplate stuff in there, but we're putting substance. I am a supporter of all of that. I just think that we also have to be cognizant that we don't lose the good things of that process. And part of that process for this school board is that we felt a part of that process. And I don't think I'm the only one saying we still feel a need to be part of that process.
I don't think staff is suggesting you're not part of that process.
I don't think so, but the policy reflects that we don't need to be part of the process because we don't even approve the plan.
But that's what we're looking at changing.
No, I'm saying that's what I'm saying, and I understand staff was doing that not because they were trying to do that, they were just adhering to what the statute change was. But I think that's where we have an opportunity to say whether we feel that's correct or not.
And my understanding, it sounds like everybody wants to continue to approve the plan.
All of them.
So, I mean, we can add that to the policy and still do that. I think there was some question about what do we want to do if there was ever a D or F school.
Right, I think if there is a
Is
D
there
or
a
F,
different step you want to put
can
into
we,
that?
can we require a presentation to the entire board on the school improvement plan?
And that you could add that into C if that's what you were talking about. That could certainly be.
That's what I'm talking about. If the school hits
I like
a D or F,
Yeah.
they will come before the board
Yeah.
to review the entire plan in a formal
I will just say that in statute, and I know you all understand this, statute's pretty broad when you hit a D or F as to the obligations that the district gets put under. And they're pretty severe. I will say, if the board's pleasure is that, I will support it, but I don't know that it's necessary to add that coming to us, because there are so many things the state requires when we get to it, if we have a school get to a D or an F, it's pretty severe. And I know that only because it's happened a couple of times, and I remember being on a SAC when that happened, and it was a pretty big thing. Or I don't know that we were D, it was back when we had the federal requirement if you were I can't remember what it was.
AYP.
Thank you. And that, I mean, it's like a whole series of things had to take place. And if I recall, a DNF or a similar situation, is it not?
Oh,
Right.
there's lots.
But that would be even more reason why we should all be aware of that process too, I think, so. Now, so we've kind of got some direction there, we'll approve all plans.
Before you
Okay.
finish up.
Okay, yeah, hold on, well, we'll approve all plans. We'll have an accounting of the DNFs, to the board, but then we still have to decide how we're gonna work the meetings.
So here's a question about that, and I maybe this is the thing. I think staff has done a great job improving the school improvement plan process. Maybe I'm wrong, I think you got enough feedback. Maybe we should just let you all go back and look at how you can merge streamlining the school improvement plan process to incorporate some of our concerns of trying to be in some meeting without. Let me talk about the elephant in the room. If I recall, our ed staff is depleted. Our talk about our leadership role. And I appreciate, I understand why. You're trying to save the district the resources, but we don't have the staff that we had 20 years ago in ed services. And I believe that impedes the process of, when we do these school improvement plans, it typically takes out at least 2 leaders out of ed services for probably at least 1 to 2 weeks. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
So that's an enormous amount of resources taken away from the district.
I would say from a staff standpoint, if you want formal presentations, then it's best that we come here and do it. It's take 2 days, workshop it, and present them all in 2 days. Or the other option would be if the board members want to go to the school and have that process with the principal and the enhancement council.
Right.
Then
Right.
that would be something that would not involve the district staff spending, like you said, 2 weeks to do.
All right, Mrs. Powers.
Oh, sorry. What I was gonna refer to, some of the committees in Tallahassee are looking at a punishment segment. If it's, for the DNS schools, the superintendent, it's suggested, therefore should be punished for these, lack of advancements, by withholding salary for as long as that school stayed a non-performing school. So one example, a person said, well, what if it's 13 years? And they said, well, the superintendent won't get money for 13 years. Right, and who's gonna stay around for 13 years? So look, sometimes, and I know you do, Thomas, look behind some of the statements made, and that's one bit to look behind.
And I don't know, I guess what I'm saying is it essential for staff today for us to give a guidance on the process of the school improvement plan?
No, but this is why, this was
No,
one of the things we wanted to get some direction.
The one thing I thought, we did a hybrid maybe of this year, and I thought, while I hate change, I thought it worked. And that was, as a board member, I met with the principal. Sometimes it was before the SAC meeting, but privately, of our SAC assigned schools, sat down and they kind of just went through. It gave us an opportunity to have a conversation.
That process works for the board, it works for us.
And I'm thinking
That process works
that we
for
should
us.
just, if we do that,
Yeah, I like that process.
we just do that. I mean, and
And that process works for us.
because that seemed to work. I think that worked. I just think it allowed, and fellow board members, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what was good was to, even though I know Mr. Mullen and Ms. Hamill always makes the principal staff available. We know statute now has changed that anyway, but you always had the doors open to the schools. And I know our principals would sit down with us whether they're our SAC school or not. It seemed to be a good kind of a single meeting. They had their plan in front of us. Sometimes we talked about the plan, sometimes they just told us about the plan. 30 minutes later, you felt like, okay, I know what's happening at this school. And then when you went into the SAC meeting, I felt as a board member I could be supportive of the administrator in that should they have any needs to be supported in that meeting. I'm not just supporting them in a meeting and I don't know really the rest of it.
I think that process works for the principals, and I think that process works for Ed Services. And then if you have questions of Ed Services after hearing it from the principal, then you can contact them.
Right, then you can contact the principal, set up a meeting. Okay. All right, I think we're clear.
We would still in October, November, bring them all to the board as an agenda item for approval of all.
Right.
Okay.
Our goal is to make that October.
Yes.
So that we can give September the chance for the plans to get approved by the schools, and then to bring them to the board by October.
Okay, so you're gonna take this and go with what we've talked about. You're also gonna find out where it's reported to, if it's required to, and then you'll come
We gotta
back.
clean up some language.
Okay.
Our most important thing to find out is if the board still wants to approve the plans, we need to make sure that that's still in the policy.
Yes, okay. And the answer to that is yes, we still want to approve the plans. Okay, all right. Okay, any other questions? All right, let's move on to our next policy, which I have is 5.20, student assignment.
The next policy is 5.20, student assignment, and this one basically is a revision to an existing policy. The next one you're going to see is a new policy on out-of-zone transfers and school choice, which is kind of intertwined with this policy. There's some overlap. These changes are basically as a result of the House Bill 7029. They're just now coming to the policy. These provisions are already in our process. We've actually updated our controlled open enrollment plan to include these things and our application process. But I'll be glad to answer any specific questions if you have any regarding these new provisions.
Okay. Do we have any questions on 5.20? Student assignment.
And you'll be seeing the controlled open enrollment plan soon. I'll be providing you with an update on our enrollment, the growth that we've had in the system throughout the past year, the 5-year trends and recommendations. And the controlled open enrollment plan is now an annual update, and you have to approve it every year, so it'll be included with that. The next item is a new policy, 5.201. This is student out-of-zone transfers and school choice. This is largely the same as what was recommended by EMCS. We didn't make a whole lot of changes to it. I did go and visit with my colleague in Orange County to find out how they were implementing it, and for a larger county that had a lot more students and enrollment to deal with these different issues. And basically these are the provisions from 7029 that have been in the new policy that's required.
In general though, isn't this largely though a practice that we've to a large extent have done with a little bit maybe more, parameters, but in the past I don't know that we've always tried to be accommodating.
We have, we didn't have your.
We didn't have open enrollment, but if somebody applied for it and there was a need, we did it.
Yes, we did not have as big of a learning curve that we had to go through. The biggest change between the way it was done before and the way it's done now is we don't approve every application every year. We only approve the new applications going forward. So we've always had about 10 or 12% out-of-zone students throughout the district, and that haven't really seen a big change in that. The other thing,
Behavior can still be a factor at retaining a student or not retaining them.
yes, if they've been suspended or expelled within the past year, then that's the basis to revoke a special attendance request and send them back to their zone school.
Okay, that's what we're
That's still in there.
And the 90%,
Typically, we will- I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
Typically, we will intervene at the district level in those situations because it depends on the time of the year.
Yeah.
We're not gonna let a student be sent back to their home school the week before finals.
Right.
And that is people try to have that happen, so I mean,
Kick
it's,
him out.
the district will intervene in those processes. We have processes in place where Chuck will intervene and make sure that we're making prudent decisions.
And I know you've stepped in and said, I'm not gonna just move a student.
Because they're still our school, you know,
Right.
regardless of where they're going. It's different, we have a little different approach if it's out of county as opposed to in-county school to school.
And I just have to, I'm sorry, sir.
I was just gonna say, the 90% threshold though is not challengeable, right? Or as far as,
Well, it seems to be what the going threshold is. It's
right,
not,
that's not in statute though.
it's not in the
We
statute.
get to set our own.
But that's consistent with what most districts are.
Yes.
at
Yeah.
90%.
All the central Florida districts are at 90%, even
Okay.
the ones surrounding
I
us.
don't, to answer your question, I don't believe anybody's challenged that number.
Right.
To my knowledge.
So, go ahead, Thomas.
No, I just, well, two things. One, I think nearly all of our elementaries now are almost at 90%.
Yep.
So there's not like, yeah.
Central Ridge, I think, was at 100.
A little over 100 this
Yeah.
morning.
And PGE, they were at 89, but they got, I think, like another, 8, 10 students just since the first of the year again, and so that's increasing. I just have to say though, and Mr. Mullen, again, it's a testament to your leadership and our principal's leadership. You all have recognized sometimes students need a different environment and have accommodated one another that said, listen, you know what, do you mind taking this student on? And even though that student may have come with some issues, principals have really worked excellent to support one another for the betterment of the student.
That's right.
And again, we didn't need a statute to do that. That's just been our practice, so.
And Ms. Himmel has always stressed that with us as far as trying to accommodate where the students, where the parents, there's sometimes personal needs, there's sometimes job-related needs, but regardless, she's always stressed to try to look at our best interest of the student.
We appreciate it.
And we're doing an online application process now. We started that this school year, and it's gone really well. So it's been a big help to us and to the parents.
The only time we really run into out of zone is when we did the new school. And that's just, no matter what you do, nobody wants to be in that new school zone, and then a year later, everybody wants to be in the new school zone. So, you remember that.
I've been there. I've been there.
Remember when we did Central Ridge, nobody wanted to go, and now everybody wants to
I
go.
called Chuck's office up as a parent, like, what are you thinking?
I actually opened the door for your child on the first day.
It's exactly true. He was there day one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And the next one is policy 6.41. This is instructional employee performance criteria. I'll just go over it quickly. There's not a whole lot of substantive change, and then Ms. Swain is here if you have any questions. The only thing in this one is an addition of a Florida Administrative Rule citation, and that is the rule is calculations of student learning growth for use in school personnel evaluations. So there's no change in the language, just the citation in the policy has changed. Any questions on that one? Okay. And then the last one is 6.70, staff training. Here again, have a couple of Florida statute changes and some subsequent language. 1006.07 is district school board duties relating to student discipline and school safety. And 1012.583 is continuing education and in-service training for youth suicide awareness and prevention. And then the subsequent changes in the language are 3C is added sexual harassment, as opposed to just harassment and discrimination. And in G, suicide awareness and prevention has been added.
For clarification, these are just because these have been now set into statute that we do, but I know we've been doing these
Yes. Yes.
in our trainings anyway. This
So
has
we
been
added-
part of our trainings to include these things.
The language has been added to the policy because of the statutes.
I don't want this, I just didn't want anyone in the public to think, oh, now we're gonna start doing something we've been doing for years.
And that concludes our policy workshops.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Dixon?
Thank you, sir.
So if I am here for the next one, I guess.
Yes, you can, yep.
I'll go get into that one.
Topic, the next topic is the public input during school board meetings. So we had a little discussion on this in our last meeting. And certainly I know Ms. Bryant had said, or Mr. Kenny brought up the time certain issue. Ms. Bryant also talked about having a time certain after 5, I think is what you said. And, you know, I felt I felt that it's important for us to give public comment at the end of the meeting. So, you know, we want to run our meetings efficiently, and so those are the topics. I've talked a little bit with staff about this and about, you know, a possible way to meet all of our desires, and that would be to have a public comment at the start of our meeting, which we've always done, to have a public comment at a time certain, and then to have a public comment at the end of the meeting. You know, there's a lot of things that we could talk about after a time certain public comment that we then don't allow anyone else to comment on. So I think, Ms. Bryant, you brought up after 5 because you want to make sure that people have an opportunity to get here after work. Is that what I assume?
Right.
Can you kind of comment on that a little bit as far as?
I just know that some people work till 5 o'clock,
Okay.
and to give them an opportunity to be here to address any concerns they might have.
Okay.
And I don't think they should have to take off from work to come here.
Okay, so what would be your proposed time certain time?
5:15?
5:15?
Yep.
Okay. If we have, you know, if the meeting goes longer, let's say we have a meeting until 7 o'clock, and we finish our meeting, our agenda items at 7, you know, that's what I think, in talking to Mr. Bradshaw too, that we would need to do a policy change in order to allow the chair to have comment at the end of the meeting, but I certainly would like to have your support or your consensus on that,
That'd be fine.
that we would have.
There is a problem though.
Okay, go ahead.
Or there's something to think about, I apologize, I
Okay.
shouldn't say the problem, there is something to think about. In talking with some previous board members as to what drove us to the policy that we have, and Mr. Mullins here, and I know he can't speak completely for the superintendent, but typically, if there's going to be an opportunity for public input, staff stays. All staff that typically that they think will be a factor stays until that point.
Correct.
Well, that means we're gonna be keeping staff necessarily maybe beyond what the superintendent would have done in order to answer those questions. So the question becomes, what is the purpose of having that input that really there's nothing we can be able to vote on without having public input at a future meeting? Really, all the public would be providing comment on is potentially, I mean, is it after the board members have spoken? Is it before the board members have spoken? Because that becomes part of that management of both the meeting and staff, because as I understand, you all had meetings that would go late into the evening and staff would be tied up.
11 and 12 o'clock at night.
Well, I think that would still be at the discretion of the superintendent. I mean, the board's not gonna.
But we would be
require
driving it by having a second opportunity or a third opportunity for input. Where if there isn't that, then there's pretty much very little that it would have to necessitate until an agenda item that a staff member would be speaking on would stay for.
Typically, or at least the last few years, Mr. Bradshaw, correct me if I'm wrong, you've always advised the board not to speak, not to address anything that comes up in the public input. And then typically we would just take that information and research it, get back to the board. We wouldn't respond right there and then at the public input, typically.
And would there need to be people here for that? I don't think so.
I have a feeling Ms. Hill is gonna keep most of us here to the end of the meeting. I don't think any of us, unless there's, personal things come up, but for the most part, we're gonna be here. We're gonna be here till the meeting's over.
Is that
I think that you need to, you look at this in two separate ways, okay? Number one, you're providing your opportunity, if someone wants to come and speak about any item that's on the agenda before the board has the opportunity to discuss it and to vote on it, you're doing that at the very beginning of the meeting. After that, it's really open, it's just open comment. So, you want a time certain for someone to be able to come in, but they can come in and they know that at 5:15 or 4:30 or whatever time that you set, they can come in here and they can talk about what's on the agenda, whether you have gotten to that point or not gotten to that point, or they can come in here and they can talk about, Christmas presents or, NFL football or whatever, whatever in the world that they want to come in and talk on. But on our open comment stuff, I've generally directed the board not to get engaged in a conversation with that person. Especially if they're just wanting to come in here and argue about something. But if there are things that they say that the board would like to consider at a later time, you're not going to address it then because it was not noticed and on the agenda, so it would have to come back at a different time and place. So you're fulfilling your statutory requirement of allowing someone to come in and speak on the agenda items. The open comment time, you want to set one at a specific time, that's fine, but you're not going to, or at least I would advise you not to, sometimes it's a very easy, thank you very much, we'll direct at the staff. We have that on occasions, and it hasn't been in a while, where we've had people at the podium who want to come in here and be very critical of staff or the board or other people, and it's best at that point in time not to engage with them and say, thank you, we'll take it under advisement or what the superintendent.
And a lot of times it's issues we can't comment on. If a parent stands there and they want to talk about their student's discipline, they can talk all night, but I can't comment on that because we're in a public meeting.
And part of our policy says we will not comment on student discipline and or employee discipline issues. And that's why, I always tell parents, understand you're waiving this portion of your child's, student.
I thought, Mr. Bradshaw, too, that having two open mic, open comment periods would potentially, it allows to have a member of the public that in that meeting can bring up the same issue multiple times, as opposed to when the first is on an item specific to the agenda or on an agenda item.
I understand. So, but they're limited to 3 minutes.
Right.
So, I guess if they wanted to stay throughout the entire time, they could get 9 minutes.
Right.
So you are supporting having an additional time?
No, ma'am, I'm not supporting
I
or
thought
not
you did.
supporting. It does not matter to me one way or the other. That's the board's decision on that. What I'm saying is that I think that, and I may have been incorrect, but I thought I was hearing an issue about, addressing, people coming back up. But the only time that they get the opportunity to speak on items, the most important time is to give them a reasonable opportunity to be heard before you discuss and vote on it. After that, they can talk about, the first one is only for items that are on the agenda. Anytime after that, they can come in and they can talk about, as long as it's not disruptive, they can come in and pretty much, I want to say we had people who used to lay on the floor and chant, things like that, a long time ago, so.
And that's the beauty. I think that again, the process, the policy that we have and the tradition in which we've been doing it has been, I think, effective. We don't have a lot of people have public input. Once in a while, we've had an item that rises to that level. But I think we've sat comfortably knowing we give 2 opportunities to talk, largely both after the dismissal of teachers can get here and communicate, which has been important to us.
So, I mean, I think it's worked what we've been doing.
I'm very comfortable, and it sort of organizes things,
Mhm.
one at the beginning, one at the end.
Well, no, that's not what we're doing. We're not doing
She's
one
meeting
at the
one, I think, later on.
We're
Yeah,
not,
one later.
what I'd like to do is one in the beginning and one in the end. I do feel like it's important to give the opportunity to speak after our business is done. If there's items that come up that someone wants to comment on, I think we should give them the opportunity to comment at the end of the meeting.
Do you think our time certain shouldn't be at 5:15, it should be at the end, whatever that is?
Well, that's what I had proposed to do, but I understand the importance of having a time certain as well. So,
Because, for
Right.
example, we
So-
finished a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and it was at 4:30.
yeah.
So
Well,
if we do
that's
it at
the
the time
dilemma.
of the end, that's why
Well,
we've done,
right.
that's really why the purpose of the 5:15 was it was later in the meeting that gave that opportunity. I don't know that I have seen in the years I've served or in the years I've watched previously where there was something that necessitated a comment after the board has finished their meeting.
But if
Oh.
our chairperson wanted to say at the end of the meeting, is there anybody here who has anything they'd like to say, wouldn't that work?
They can do that. I mean,
Right,
there's
that's
nothing
what, that's what I like to
prohibits
do,
that.
because the opposite of that is if our meetings finish early, and now, but we're not gonna allow the public comment, but we gotta wait another 30 to 45 minutes, and so we're gonna have to wait, the meeting's over, and if this person wants to speak, they're gonna have to wait, while we all wait, to come back in and open the meeting and make their comment.
And sometimes the chairperson has said, at that point, would you like to come and talk to us now? We've done that. Because they're here and we're
Right,
here.
and so, in talking to Mr. Bradshaw,
The board and staff would, yeah, would certainly.
I would go with that.
and so,
I guess that's just a chair's discretion.
I think it is.
Mhm.
right,
Because
so,
at 4:30, if I'm the chair and there's people here that want to speak at 5:15, I ask, would you like to speak now? Because we're here.
And I know that.
But you're still gonna have to meet again at 5:15.
Yes.
And, I mean, that's the only thing that's really why I've kind of,
Right.
always sat there when I've sat at the chair. I have always though, and Mr. Bradshaw, you've talked about it and seen some other situations, consistency in our public input process has been essential to protecting, there being an issue. And I actually go as far as when I serve to read if there is a speaker, to read what they're supposed to adhere to, because I think that's important so that if we were to ever have an issue, and I can tell you when I was chair, we did have some people that would take that opportunity during public input to use that for political or other purposes.
So we've got our first time certain, then we've got our citizens' comments at 5:15, and anything else is at the chairman's discretion.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with
Isn't
that.
there a statement written up there?
I think there is.
Yeah, and there's a statement in
And
the chair.
there's a statement here too. And I can't remember in the years that I've been here that we've had people walk in, I think, after the agenda started and give Ms. Verderami a green card and it's something that they wanted to speak about, something that was still coming up. And, made the chair aware of it and allowed them to go ahead and speak. I can't.
Chairman's discretion.
I can't really remember a time when you, except for once when we came close to having to stop someone from speaking.
Well, that's the only thing that I think becomes the question is,
Sure.
do you open up that issue where you have to close that?
Well, then
And then I guess you could take that under, if that became an issue, then you would address it.
If that becomes an issue, I know that there's a sheet over here and the chairman warns them once or twice and you can say that they're disruptive and have the deputy remove them.
Sure.
But you're not talking about the chairman's discretion, we had the chairman decide that, after 15 minutes after we started, the person could come up, and another 40 minutes to come up to, and you're not talking about that kind of discretion, you're talking about at the end.
I think technically the chair does have that discretion.
Yes.
I think that is true.
I mean, I think that there can be consequences to it, but I think the chair does have that discretion.
Everybody
But I also think you need to take into consideration that our community, we don't have unfortunately, we don't have a lot of public participation, so it's not like there's a big problem that I've seen, you know, I think the only time that I've seen it where we had to really limit people and to crack down on it was back in '08 or '09 when we had 2 mil money discretion from 1.5 to all the way to 2 mils, and the prices of real estate was really going up, and we must have had 100 people show up saying, please don't put it at 2 mils, and the board voted to do it at 1.75. Outside of that, you know, we had one employment issue where we had some people show up, and you just limit them down and let her go.
You know, like Thomas said about uniformity, if we're doing something, let's do it the same way, let's not.
And you get a
all
large
over the
crowd,
place.
the board chair has to give them like 20 minutes as a group.
Yes.
Absolutely, it's, yeah, they have, I think they have to notify us if there's gonna be a large group, but yes, they're at 3 minutes apiece, or if there's gonna be a large group, I think they get 10 minutes.
In the event that you have those situations, again, that we don't necessarily foreseeably see, but just, I know there's some boards that will say, I will permit 30 minutes of comment on this issue. Now, I think, I'm not talking about one they're gonna vote on, I'm saying on a non-voting. On a voting one, you have to give everyone an opportunity.
Right.
But there, I know that, like in, whether that be a workshop item or an item in which there's not going to be a vote taken, that I thought the chair has the ability to limit the period of time we're going to listen.
Or, yeah, and our policy says that you know, it's one 3 minute per person. I guess they can have up to 10 minutes. The chair has the ability to extend that, but that can be overruled by a majority vote, you know, of the board. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do work. So, I mean, I think we're all saying is we're trying to keep a time certain at approximately 5:15. We've sometimes changed that depending on if there was a requirement of a certain thing at a certain time. And then if the chair desires to have an additional time at the end of the meeting, that's at his or her discretion.
For Ms. Bergerami's clarification, no earlier than 5:15, at 5:15.
I think that it's what we've done because the chair then, now that there's been discussion, policy doesn't state that there's a second one, but it's been since, again, I've been here, that it's typically been at 5:15, but there have been times where we had something that was pushed up to a
We've had
required.
5:30.
Yeah, we've had, I think.
That's what I'm asking, so, but you don't want it any earlier than 5:15?
But the policy, I mean, you know, it doesn't really say who sets the time certain. It should be the board, right? And we should all agree, I guess, on the time certain.
My feeling on this has just been, the chair does have discretion to say whether it's 5:15, 5:30. I think those have always been within the parameters of that chair to help manage the agenda. On the other hand, the board is the one that works with the chair to say, this has been the way we've operated the agenda. And so we're asking then, you know, for it to be within these parameters. If it doesn't, then the board, if the chair, and this isn't the case, Mr. Dodd, so I don't want to think, if the board disagreed with the chair, the board could take action to correct the chair's decision. But up until that decision, I believe it's the discretion of the chair.
Okay, so,
Is anyone in disagreement in thinking that?
okay, so what I'm hearing then is that we have our opening citizen comments on all the agenda items, the green card, we'll have the time certain at 5:15, and then I will have, as the chair, I would like to have offer the opportunity for public comment at the end of business. Now, that doesn't mean that's not at the end of the meeting, that's, you know, where that will be is, it will be, you know, before we go into our comments.
Mhm.
So that's,
That's all maybe all together, that may be right at 5:15,
It-
some meetings, you know.
it could be, but I guess if we post 5:15, then we'll have to always keep that, right, as far as if we post it on the agenda.
So we will be posting the 5:15.
We'll post the 5:15, but I would also like to post the comments again before our,
Mr. Chairman, where do you want that? Do you want that listed before any other business or after any other business? Because they may have comments to make after y'all.
I think it'll be before any other business.
So here's just a logistical question.
Okay.
If assuming 5:15, because a lot of times our meetings cross over at that same time.
Mm-hmm.
At 5:15, you have, we have public input at time certain, and we finished. We're waiting for 5:15, which does happen, because we finished all of their business. At 5:15, we do it, somebody's here and they speak. You then have to give, if we have it on the agenda, then you're gonna need to give a second opportunity for that person to speak if you're putting it on the agenda.
Right, I guess that would only be if it's.
It's not like you can decide, I
Right,
think,
that's right, yeah.
that, okay, we're doing it at 5:15 unless.
Well, I know in years past too, we've gotten done
No.
with the business portion said, okay, is there anybody who wants to address the board now? Because we've
Right.
got 15 minutes to wait till 5:15, and then we wait till, people come and talk, and then we come back at 5:15, and there's no one left.
And we'll still have to do that if we put the time certain, but at least if we will allow people to comment at that time.
Well, and the reason you're doing it is because you're adding it to the end of the meeting.
Right.
Regardless of when the time certain is.
Yes.
So where
Okay.
would you like that, Mr. Dodd, before any other business or before adjournment?
Before any other business.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next item is the graduation rate calculations and recent changes to the House School. And Mr. Bradshaw, I don't think we need, is there any need for Mr. Bradshaw to be here? Okay.
Thank y'all.
Okay.
Enjoy your trip.
Yes, ma'am.
Drive safe.
Thank you.
Wes, you get that response.
It'd be probably about noon.
Okay, hello again. I'm here to share with you our graduation rate data that did come from the state this month. So what we're looking at today and explaining today is from 2016-17's group of seniors that graduated last year. We're starting off here just reminding everyone what is the four-year graduation rate. It's the number of students who graduate in 4 years with a regular high school diploma. And that's divided by the number of students who form what is called the adjusted cohort for the graduating class. This slide also is just reiterating what a cohort is and how that cohort of students throughout the 4 years of high school gets adjusted. So there are students that are subtracted from the cohort, and there are students that are added to the cohort each year until they're graduating their senior year. And those are the ones that would then make up that denominator. This chart here, we created this graphic to kind of show really how complex it is for that one group, that one cohort to be calculated. So this graphic here is showing you just one group of students. So last year's seniors that graduated in 2017, this whole process started when they left 8th grade in year 0. That's that blue box. So when they left 8th grade and entered 9th grade, that was considered year 0, and the state took information from Survey 2 based on their initial entry into 9th grade. Then, at the end of 9th grade, they adjusted that cohort via Survey 5. And then at the end of their sophomore year, that's year 2, they adjusted the cohort again. Then at the end of their junior year, that's year 3, adjusted it. And then at the end of their senior year, they adjusted it for year 4. Down there it tells you how it's adjusted. If students transfer into the school, and they are part of that same cohort, they then are added on into that denominator. Now, students can be removed from the cohort if they transfer to another public or private school, or they transfer to home education, or of course, deceased students are also pulled out of the denominator as well. So after that year 4, the graduation rate gets calculated by the district and by the school, by that formula that we said before. So this shows you that it is a 4-year process to then get that final number. Two big major legislative actions that impacted grad rates that I think it's really important to understand when especially comparing Citrus County's grad rate to all the other counties in the state is Florida's 2017 legislature amended 1008.34 so that high school students who transfer to a private school, which with the school district has a contract with, are now to be included in the 4-year adjusted graduation rate. and they count as non-graduates. Now, before this year, those students were pulled out of the denominator. They were just counted as transfer students, as if, like, say, a student transferred from us and just went to another school, whether it be private or public. They were pulled from the denominator. However, now with this new rule, any student that we had from last year, because this went retro, we had to change our withdrawal codes for last school year. We had to change them if they transferred into the Ed Options, which we did have 43 students that did do that. They received a diploma through Ed Options. It wasn't a Florida diploma, but it would have been considered, yes.
Can you clarify something?
Mhm.
We just didn't drop them from the equation because they entered into that.
Only if they received a diploma.
Only if they received a diploma.
Correct.
There's a difference.
Thank you.
As long as they were eligible to receive a diploma from that school, but not
Not ours.
ours,
Mhm.
were with Citrus County
Correct.
transferring a student.
We didn't send them into there so that they wouldn't count against us.
So in other words, you were doing what was right for the student.
Correct. If the student was not on track to graduate at Options, we did keep them in our numbers. Okay, so that was very important for us to know, because that is not something I believe all counties did, hence this legislation. So we did do that. So those 43 students that were going, they actually receiving a diploma that you enter college with, military with, it just was not a Florida diploma. So they would be counted as a non-graduate. So now those 43 students are part of our denominator, but not in our numerator. So of course it's going to lower and decrease our
I'm
graduation
sorry, the
rates.
fourth grade teacher and you, when it came to that, I just heard with those two words.
That is true. Now, the other legislation action that did impact, yes,
About the Renaissance though, because that.
but not Renaissance, the adoptions.
Yeah, but people are saying that we're taking our kids and putting them in Renaissance so that we don't have to count them, but you can't graduate from Renaissance.
Correct, that they do not receive a diploma. And students that are in Renaissance, you will actually see in the next slide, they do count as non-graduates. If they are a senior and they were supposed to graduate and they did not, and they are in Renaissance, they counted negative towards our district grad rate. They are part of our district grad
Do
rate.
we provide them if they are on track to graduate, but they're at Renaissance? Do we ship over their final exams for classes that
Well, they take all exams and things like that over at Renaissance, absolutely. Like if they are,
could graduate while at Renaissance, they just not.
Absolutely.
oh, they would
graduate,
receive,
and that happens.
right, and they wouldn't receive there isn't a Renaissance diploma though. If they were from Citrus High School and went to Renaissance and they were on track to graduate and at the end they're going to graduate, they would get a Citrus High diploma.
Okay.
They're our students still,
AES.
I think I was right.
just like AES, correct.
Yeah.
No different than AES.
Right. Micro is different, however, because they do have their own diploma for micro. Okay. So this, though, the first law there that we were just talking about was talking about our contracted private schools. And you kind of just have a little history there of before 2015, it was Penn Foster. From 2015 to the end of last year, we had adoptions. And then this year, we do have a contract with Giant Academy from Edgenuity. However, we are not utilizing it in that way that we have in the past. Now, the plus, in 2014, there was legislation that passed that amended ESE students who previously obtained a special diploma, which if a student gets a special diploma, that is also considered a non-graduate. Even though it is a diploma, it is not a standard high school diploma. So any of our students that receive special diplomas would be considered a non-graduate. However, with this legislation, those students are now able to receive a standard diploma that would count as a yes in our numerator through modified coursework. So this change had a positive impact on grad rates. So based on quantity of students that you had affected in each one of these legislation impacts, that of course is going to show why maybe some counties actually improved grad rates, some counties declined in grad rates. It mattered how many of benefited or did not benefit from these two pieces of legislation.
But if I am a student at Crest, I'm not on what would have been.
You're in special diploma.
Well, now that there isn't a special diploma.
Well, we do still have some students that are still receiving a special diploma if they chose that. In fact, by 2022, there will be no more special diplomas.
Right, so
Right.
if someone has chosen to go with a Gen Ed diploma.
Correct.
And they are, I always forget the term, but it's because they are, if you're not getting a special diploma, you need to meet or your goal.
You have a modified coursework. Access, yes,
points.
access
Thank you,
points,
Simone.
correct.
And so I I get my access points, which will travel with me with my certificate of completion. The access points will help, I get a certificate of completion after 4 years.
No, you get a standard diploma.
But if I have not met all of the requirements for a standard
Oh, if you have
diploma-
not, right, for them to, is that what you're saying?
Right. Because the challenge, I thought that, because there's been legislation, both FSBA and the Superintendent's Association has asked to bring back special diplomas.
Okay.
Because when they removed the special diplomas and you went to now a certificate of completion with access points, it potentially increased the number of non-grads. Is that what we're seeing yet?
No, we are not seeing that. We are seeing students graduating with a standard diploma, and they were on track for a special diploma. However, they changed and are doing the modified coursework and assessments. For example, EOCs and FSA and so forth that are those requirements, there are access biology EOCs.
Right.
There's an access US history EOC that correlates to that modified coursework. So those students are taking the statewide assessments for requirements for graduation, but it is modified and based on the access standards, not necessarily the Florida standards. Does that make sense?
Correct.
So they are able, in fact, Crest, we did have, their 6 seniors last year, one of them did get a standard diploma. And I believe 4 or
But
5
of the
got
other
actually the
ones,
special.
The other ones, are they now looked at, for example, as non-grads?
If they got a special diploma or.
If they got a special diploma, yes, they are non-grad. If they got a certificate of completion, yes, they are a non-grad.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking, because it doesn't mean that kids that used to be able to get a special
Are just
diploma
now getting a
are
standard.
now gonna be able
No,
to get a
no.
standard diploma.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think is that threshold has increased. While there are opportunities through access points
Right.
to achieve a standard diploma, it doesn't necessarily mean that those that were successful under a special diploma
Are going right.
Are gonna
But
be
either way, they
successful.
would have been a non-grad. So now, with this legislation, you now actually have the opportunity to not only be part of the denominator, because you already were, now you actually have the opportunity to be in the numerator, where before, you weren't even given that option with a special diploma or certificate of completion. You were going to definitely be a non-grad no matter what you did.
Right.
Okay. All right, so now, here you just see some trend data from 2003 to 2017. You see that we are the blue, where the state average is that orange.
Can I just point out, and I've said this, I think, to you, Ms. Crow.
Mhm.
If you go back to the previous slide just for 1 second. You talk about the options here, Giant Academy from 2017 to 2018, 2015 to 2017, ed options. The pre-2015 is Penn Foster. Would you slip to the next slide again? If I recall, when we had Penn Foster, if I recall, there were only two courses that our high school students required to take with Penn Foster in order for all of their other coursework to transfer and then graduate with a diploma from Penn Foster. The other 2 programs have now, I believe, increased that requirement to 3 or 4 courses.
4 courses.
4 courses. I say that because if you look at when we were trending above, we had a very viable alternative option with Penn Foster. And I recall generally in those times, about half the students that actually could have used Penn Foster, in the end didn't need to because they kind of had that safety net there and they knew it was there. Next time they took the test, they were successful.
Because they were relaxed.
Because they were relaxed. And so half of them that ended up being able to do that didn't even need it. I say that because, again, and this is really a compliment to our district, we were doing the right things. And with the change that took place in last legislation, they've made it harder. I mean, to graduate under Giant Academy, it wasn't an easy task. It was like having to go back to school again for some of those students because they had to take those 4 courses, which meant basically their last semester was either spent doing those 4 courses and making sure they had the other requirements and were on track to graduate. That's generally correct?
Yeah, typically in December, if a student had not met those requirements, sometimes they would go ahead and enter into Giant Academy. They would start taking the courses while they were at their high school. And if by the end of the year they had not passed the state exams or met, the state requirements, they would be withdrawn at the last moment. If they had, successfully passed those 4 courses and met all other graduation requirements, then we'd withdraw them so they could get that diploma through Ed Options or Giant Academy, which are both accredited high schools, nationally accredited high schools. So they got a diploma that allowed them to go to college, allowed them to do vocational, allowed them to do anything that the Florida diploma would allow.
And Mr. Rowland, we, during that time, because I know this has been argued about school districts, we supported them. We didn't just say, we're transferring you in, good luck, hope that this works. The schools supported that student, provided the learning environment, the strategies, the discipline, the assistance to be successful, the tutoring, all of those things as we would do in any way trying to have an at-risk student be successful in graduation. So we're paying for all those resources to accomplish that. Is that generally correct?
Yeah, that's correct. They're in a lab setting with a certified teacher taking those courses and providing supports to those students, as well as taking other coursework from the high school that's required from the high school.
And their GPA could be a 3-point something. Their GPA would have no bearing on the graduation requirement other than assuming that they've got to be at least a 2.0. So I just found it interesting looking at that data, knowing the Penn Foster and being a huge supporter, and I've been a supporter of all of these alternatives, but knowing that as the national graduation standards changed, so did the options that we had available to us. Because I think Penn Foster didn't even become an option any longer because they just weren't even really an option for us. But in those years, we were excelling above the state by a lot.
Because those students were transferring out of our denominator and graduating via Penn Foster.
With only 2 courses that they had to do, as opposed to even 4. I mean, 4 is a lot to take on for an at-risk student.
Okay, so then when you see the map here of Florida, you have more of a visual of all of the counties, where you see it's color-coded, where the red is their grad rate for the district is below that 60%, all the way to the green, 90% and above, where we're in that beige color there at that 70 to 79% graduation rate, where the state graduation rate is that 82%. So there you can kind of just see an idea of where each of these counties are located and how they performed regarding graduation rate.
Any idea why South Florida is in the blue? I would never have guessed that. I would put another color with it. West of Miami-Dade, yeah.
Just, I mean, that's why they are. I mean,
Yeah. What are they doing to make?
Oh, that's
higher
different?
rates? Yeah.
and I mean, that's a question that I know our Ed Services team is looking at and asking other counties, specifically counties that meet our demographics as well. You know what I'm saying? And seeing what are they doing? Because when you look at our achievement levels, when you look at our school grades and our district grades, and especially in each subject area where we're excelling above some of these counties that are in the blue, but their grad rate though is above us. So trying to figure out what is it that they are doing and we are not, and that is something that we are in the process.
Part of it has been is that they were transferring students out. That's what has hurt us.
Correct.
Because there's a couple of counties that had substantially lower achievement scores, higher economically disadvantaged households, and we're having 95% graduation rates.
That is correct.
You
Some
know,
of them even
graduation, when you look at graduation rates, so much of it comes down to reporting and how do you report students that are leaving or not graduating.
and how they're withdrawn.
The focus should be on, in my opinion, the dropout rate. Because
Yes.
you'll find out as we go through this presentation, of the 21% of the kids we're talking about, most of them are still sitting in a classroom right now, still getting instruction, and are on track to get a diploma. However, the state considers them a non-graduate in this statistic because it's not 4 years.
And if some schools just transfer them out, and if they go to a private school
Or transfer to homeschool.
or transfer to homeschool, they are no longer on the books and are no longer against your grad rate.
That is correct.
And there's no way it is unlikely that districts will be audited based on that, at least at this time. Maybe they will in the future, based on that, because there is, I don't know that the blue that Ms. Powers you're talking about is an indication that they are necessarily more successful. They just may be better at reporting.
My thought is exactly that. When I looked at that, I thought, no, something's wrong.
Maybe not even
something's wrong.
better at it.
I was gonna say, I was
Yeah,
thinking-
that's it. That's
Are
a
they
great
fairly
point.
reporting, not better
They
reporting? Yeah.
creative.
That's
Yeah,
a
that's-
much
that's-
better
Better
way.
is the wrong
Well,
word.
and I still remember even within our county, we used to get transfers right before the FCAT from our own schools. And I said, we need to trade them some of ours back. We can't keep taking all these kids that are not gonna pass FCAT. So we were even guilty of that in our county.
And I just want to make a comment. I know our school spends a large amount of time dedicated to this task of identifying those students and counseling with those students and making sure they have the proper remediation. So, and in Ed Services is a constant discussion, and we're going to continue to have the discussion. Is it a coding issue? We're going to look at who can we visit to really get an inside scoop on what they're doing. We look at free and reduced, but we know there's other free and reduced counties, performing better with graduation rates than us. We've talked about unemployment rates. Is there a correlation between counties in the state with our unemployment rates? Because we are, third from the bottom in unemployment in the state of Florida. So it's a constant analysis. We've got to find the answer. I never want to be below the state average in anything that we do. So, but just know our schools are working diligently, and our Ed Services team is constantly analyzing, and we got more work that we're going to be doing to try to figure this out.
Mr. Rowland, myself, Ms. Humbaugh, we meet with the high school principals, we look at the dropout codes, we look at where each one of these students is going. That's how we have the data that they're going to show you. We know there's very little we can do with a student that just disappeared 4 months ago, and we have no knowledge of where they're at, and we can't track it down, and that happens in our community. We have kids that just moved, relocate, and we can't ever find them. We have kids that just don't show back up in August. And we try, we have procedures and processes in place, and we try to locate those kids, but we are not successful in all cases.
And when you're not, that holds against us, doesn't it?
Right, those are considered not.
They count against us as dropouts, but we want you to understand, we have process in place, they just don't go, it's just not a situation where we just mark them absent and move on. We do home visits, we have phone calls, we have conferences, we try to get them into micro school, we try to get them in anything that we can do to try to get them. Our principals are very creative and very diligent, and they work hard at this. And it is frustrating that we can't seem to get those numbers up. But as Mr. Rowland pointed out, we sometimes are dealing with some demographics that we struggle with.
I still, and I know you all know I have this problem with this. This law was passed during the spring of 2017. It was signed into law to be effective July 1st, 2017, about a month later after our students had graduated. And the reporting that they made retroactive is nothing that our staff could have done anything different about. And when you look at the 82% that the state is, if you look at our district's 78.9, which is basically a hold from 79 last year, I'm gathering we're probably talking about 3 or more percent we might have gotten back.
We would have been 82% if we did not include, if
There
we
you go.
included if the law is still the same, where those 43 students were pulled out of the denominator, or the ones that did go
So
to
we would have
options,
increased
we
by
would have been 82%.
3% our grad rate.
And I think this chart shows you how hard our high schools are working. When you see Citrus High's at 87%, Crystal, they're all above the state. And you look at where we're coming down, and they are Cypress Creek, Renaissance,
Right.
Sumner Micro School, Crest. Those are numbers that are bringing the district average down. But again, those are places where we're providing extra services for struggling students that need that extra time.
And something also Mr. Mullen brought up is Crest, Micro, and Cypress. Those 3 schools specifically bring in students from outside of our county into them for the services that they provide. So that is something not necessarily other counties have. So because, we have those schools as something that's, available to outside of our county students, we are now basically saying, okay, well, we're actually taking in students from outside, knowing that they're probably going to count against us in those environments, because they're going to be needing more time, like Ms. Roman was saying, and being a non-grad, but they are getting the services that they need because of those three, environments being so unique.
And micro in itself has a mission to try and capture kids.
At their own pace.
Yeah, I mean, so you can't even, they're not even on the same scope of a K-12 district.
But if 6 students enter micro school and their cohort is not graduating yet, and they enter micro school and they don't graduate on time, and they're from another county, they're going to count against
us.
county's district rate.
If
Maybe
I-
not one of our high schools' rate, they're going to count against our district rate.
So I'm a senior, and I know that I'm interested in taking a program at WTC, and while I'm doing well, but I really know I'm going to go in vocational. So in my second semester, I'm sitting there thinking, I think I'd like to transfer over to WTC. I'll probably finish next year my high school stuff, but I'm going to start my vocational stuff. How am I graduate? Where am I?
They're considered as still enrolled.
But they're going to be a non-grad because
Right,
I'm
oh yeah,
not-
still enrolled as a non-grad.
as a non-grad.
Mhm, correct.
Because I didn't do that. And if I didn't pass a concordance score on anything until the August test,
Right,
I'm
that's
a
a
non-grad.
non-grad. Mhm.
I think you can still take it up till the
To the end of summer,
July.
summer school, right. Summer school counts still as part of the 16-17 school year. Mhm. So this chart here does break down the 3 different high schools, and then other, and bringing your attention to Crest, Micro, Renaissance, and Cypress being other schools that do contribute to the district rate. So this really does help answer that question when the public asks, how is the district at a 78.9 when all of your high schools are in the 80s? And it's because of that other component that definitely contributes to the district and not directly to those 3 high schools. You do see the lines there, our district and our state. And we did, in the chart on the left, actually show you the number of students. And that's where you see 1 out of 6 of our seniors at Crest, that's 17% of them, did get a standard diploma, like I was talking about before. And then you also see, of course, the number of students that did achieve the standard diploma compared to the cohort total number. Here it kind of explains what we were just saying, Mr. Kennedy, where you were saying, okay, well, still enrolled is considered a non-grad. This pie chart shows you the 3 categories basically students are classified as. They are either a standard graduate, which means they got a standard high school Florida diploma within 4 years since entering 9th grade, or they are considered a cohort dropout. Okay, they dropped out sometime between 9th and 12th grade, or they're considered a non-grad, that's the green. And to be considered a non-grad, that means they received either a special diploma, a GED diploma, a certificate of completion, or they're still enrolled, or they were withdrawn to a contracted private school. And that last bottom one in that green box is new this year, because that was just new legislation where you'll notice when you look at the previous year's graduation rate, the chart at the bottom, that withdrawn to contracted private school is not there. So you have an idea in parentheses of the number of actual students that were affected by each one of those categories. So, that's where you see that 43. However, when you see still enrolled, 82 of our, cohort last year are still enrolled. Maybe like we said, they might get it in August. They might get their diploma in December. And those students will basically never count in the numerator for a grad rate because their cohort is already graduated.
McKay Scholarship, if I go to a school that's a McKay Scholarship in my senior year, and I transfer out, I'm assuming I'm in none of those categories, I'm a transfer student and the state's paying for it. But I'm under a McKay Scholarship.
Right, but whatever,
Whoever picks you up.
yeah, whatever school you're at now has you.
But I'm saying that they're not in our cohort group any longer, they're a transfer student, even though the state may be paying for them.
It all depends on where they go.
If they went to Inverness Christian Academy.
Oh, then they're out of our denominator.
Out of our county.
So, but yet the state's still paying for them though.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, that's the kind of the issue that I have about this scenario. So I might as well just I could send a bunch of them through a McKay Scholarship and cut a deal with a private school. I'm not
But
suggesting
you don't have a
that,
contract.
but I'm saying.
As long as you don't have a contract with them.
If you could, yeah, as long as you don't have a contract with them.
I think Miami-Dade might have done it.
That's what's going through my mind, is how many of these other districts that.
And there is no, and
have
because
like
there's no
blue crest.
requirement, I mean, they'll be fine.
Now, the rest of the slides, just a few, we broke down the data even further to analyze and look for some trends. This one we found interesting and definitely a topic that we have started discussing further. Graduation rates based on gender. Here you see the blue representing males and the red representing the females. So as a district, 87.2% of the graduates were females, where 70.3 males. Notice that there is a gap of 16.9% between females graduating versus our males graduating. So that is a significant increase in the gap compared to the previous year. We only had a 6% gap when we compared the number of when we look at our cohort and the number of our boys that graduated compared to the females graduating. So, and that was across the district. We see there at each school, that gap really increased. Some schools more significant than others. And when compared to the state gap of only 7.4, and now we also know, that each cohort is a different makeup of students. But that's why it's important to start looking at trend data with this. If we are looking at, are a lot of our, few years in a row, is that our boys not graduating significantly lower than our girls graduating. And if that's the case, we need to definitely be revisiting and looking at why is that? And what are we doing to address that?
And when you say you're gonna look at that, I mean, you're discussing that with your principals,
Right.
Those are topics that we're trying to develop strategies for.
All the way back even to middle school, because we were even looking at your honor rolls in middle schools. Are they predominantly girls? Are they boys? I mean, even those kind of discussions back, not just our high school principals having those conversations.
I just have a question. Is it possible that there are just more girls than there are boys?
It's the percent of those girls that graduated. It's the percent of the boys that graduated. It's not just percent of the graduates were girls. You know what I'm saying? It was the actual girls that were in there, in that class, what percent of those girls graduated, and then what percent of the boys graduated.
I just thought it was a number then. Okay, never mind.
No,
But I
unfortunately.
remember, we were graduating very similar numbers years and years ago, but then it flipped in college. The boys were making higher scores than the girls. And so I'm not so sure that this isn't something that's been around for a long time, because girls are just better students at the high school though, while the boys are, well, they're looking at girls. But they, used to be at the colleges. Do we have any data that
And not
shows the
for
colleges?
college-wise, no, not, but that is something definitely to compare to. But you're also looking at a different group of students, because not all these students are college-bound. So you're not necessarily looking at a same or similar demographic of students.
That's true.
So that would be, the question. But I mean, like you said, girls might be more studious, but are we teaching the same? Are we our instructional practice is different? Or should they be different? Those kind of discussions is what we're having. There's a lot of research out there that caters to both, but to read and to look and talk about.
And I was just gonna make one comment. Some of the research, I mean, there's a wide variety of research. Some research says there's no difference in learning boys and girls, but one of the major trains of thought is that girls are better abstract learners, and that's often how material is presented, where boys need to make those connections and need that hands-on component. So, so that's something to consider.
That'd be an instructional practice. Are we are we differentiating in our instructional practice intentionally? Okay, the next one is our graduation rates based on disability status. So these are students with a disability who graduated with a standard diploma. So as our district, you can see in the past 4 years, we have improved that percent gradually. So this year we are at a 56.6% of the 143 students in our district that are students with disability. So 143 of them, of that 143, 56.6% of them did graduate with a standard high school diploma within 4 years with a Florida diploma. Now the state average is a 66%. So we have improved, but then of course on the flip side, we are still below that state average. So Ms. Kirby, I know, is definitely very in tune to this and is on it and is really trying to dive in further into the whys and what are we doing about it, and really getting those conversations, not waiting for their senior year, because like I showed you before, that cohort, we start all the way there from freshman year, every year with those adjustments and so forth. So we really need to be, following them and tracking them throughout the years, so that way it's not a surprise their senior year of whether or not they are on track to graduate, are they going to get a certificate of completion, are they still up for the special diploma when really they should be going for the general diploma, those kinds of things. So they are
And maybe
in
we need to
tune,
go all the way to middle school.
starting in middle school. But we have our early warning system set up, and definitely in our middle school as well. Okay, and then for our economically disadvantaged students, so these are the students free and reduced lunch. So in our district last year, in the 16-17 cohort, we had 618 students that were classified as economically disadvantaged. And of those 618, 72.3% of them graduated with a standard diploma, which was a little bit of a decrease from the previous year of 74.8. And again, it is lower than that state average of 76.8. Next one is, oh, sure.
The same information applied across the board. In other words, the definition of disadvantaged economically.
Free and reduced
County
lunch.
is the same as the Putnam
Yes.
County?
Yes, absolutely.
We do it based on free and reduced lunch.
Mhm.
That's a standard criteria.
At-risk status, how these students are defined as when they enter ninth grade, they look at their 8th grade FSA scores. Any student that received a 1 or a 2 in both their ELA and math tests are labeled as an at-risk student. So any student that entered into ninth grade that had a 1 or a 2, a level 1 or a level 2 on both their ELA and math, so they're entering that high school as an at-risk student academically. We had 230 of those students in this cohort that entered into ninth grade with a level 1 or a 2 in both ELA and math. So of those 230 students that obviously were at risk, they were low performing walking in the door, 58.7% of them did graduate with a standard diploma within the 4 years. So of course that we did increase, so there is reason to celebrate there. However, again, when you compare to that state average is where we want to say, okay, they're looking at the same thing. They're looking at the same number of students that entered ninth grade, and their state average being 65.1, we of course want to increase that to at least above that. But we are going in the right direction. And I believe this is the last slide. Here's the graduation rates by subgroup, by race. So here you see each group of bars is the year, so all the way back from 2012-13, where you see your white students are going to be in the blue bar, your Hispanic is that gray one, black students is that middle like turquoise, 2 or more races is the orange, and then Asian is the green. We don't have enough of American Indian or Pacific Islander to be tracked, so you won't see those bars on our graphs. But then you also see the same information down at the bottom in the chart if you are more of a numbers person than the visual bar. So there you'll see from year to year the percent of students in each one of those races or ethnicities that graduated of the cohort with a standard diploma. And in the yellow box on the right, you can compare it to the state for each one of those subcategories as well, the state average. So when looking at it, I mean, with all of these, our black students, we had 59 total in the cohort. We are above the state average of those students graduating with a standard diploma with a 76.3, where the state had a 74.8. However, with the rest of the categories, we are slightly below the state average in those different subgroups.
All right.
Okay?
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
No problem.
What I'd like to do is take a 5-minute break before we get into the health insurance, but then come back and do that and not break for lunch. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, very good. So we'll be recessed for 5 minutes.